Why is Darktide dying? This is a question a lot of people have asked, a lot of people have argued about ever since the launch of Darktide. Why is Darktide dying? The game has gone through a few ups and downs, but there's a core player base that has always stayed true, that is always hungry for content, always wanting more out of the game, wanting what they know the game could be from the developers over at Fact Shark. So to get into it, we will hop on over to the Steam chart. We'll take a look at the Steam charts. What does the history of Darktide actually look like? Because these Steam charts really give us a glimpse into the health of the game, the state of the game. The game launches in November 2022. Huge success, huge player numbers, huge numbers are going up, but immediately we start to run into some problems. People are complaining. There's this controversy about skin prices. I really think, you guys got to get over it. It's a game that we actually want content for. I think the skin prices debacle was a bit silly. Okay, the prices were actually pretty nice compared to other AAA titles. They were half the price that they could have been charging and could have called for reasonably. Then we get into the other problems the game had: major stability issues, late game play issues, content drip stream issues, lack of communication from the devs. The devs originally promised a new map every month. However, the months came by, 1, 2, 3 months, barely any content. We're getting drip fed some content, some new stuff. Maybe there was one new map in there, but overall, 6 months later, the player base was less than 10% of the average player base at launch. To a relatively new and highly anticipated Warhammer 40k Darktide game, which is a huge IP. 40k is hugely popular, has extremely devoted fan base, yet we still see this huge drop-off. 1 year later, Darktide comes out with its year 1 update. The game is majorly more stable. The talent tree has been totally reworked into something that's actually fairly interesting, other than these very narrow, at launch, options that you had for each character. We see some new mission types added into the game. We've seen multiple new maps added to the game, each of which, might I add, significantly better than the launch maps. Now, the launch maps were, I still think, fantastic maps, but the new maps at launch, at the year 1 anniversary launch, actually fantastic maps. The map design, extremely detailed, very interesting, huge scale, all around great maps. But a few months after that, we've seen the same story happen again. The player base has dropped off. Now, what is interesting that you can see, though, is that the player base after the year 1 update dropped off much slower than it did after the year 1 update, so we'll get into that in a second here. So, that brings us to our first point. Unaddressed issues in Darktide. We'll start off with the bugs. The game came out, it was buggy. And as I walk us around through the ship here, think of all the bugs you might have experienced in Darktide. Have you been thrown through the map? Has your game crashed mid-game? Have you had mutants crush you through the map? You just pop up underneath, you're stuck there, you have to leave the game, hopefully you get to reconnect, right? Those kinds of things have plagued Darktide for quite a while, ever since the game launched. And to be fair, they've much improved now. The game's much more stable, the game's much more consistent. That's nice. But what are things the devs haven't done that probably should have been there since the start? Well, for first off, one that I personally really enjoy is the True Level mod. Why are there mods in Darktide? Well, it's because there are unaddressed issues that the community has easily fixed in minutes or hours or days that the Darktide devs just don't even comment on. Interesting. So we'll see Maloney Roney over here is level 103 on his Psyker, while Charles is actually level 6. That's nice to know, now I can actually tell what their skill level is, because in Darktide, once you get to level 30, which to be honest is basically the end of the tutorial, 0 through 30 in Darktide is essentially the tutorial. Any builds you make, craft before level 30, that's when the game really starts, okay? That's when the game actually gets interesting, is when you hit level 30. So being able to see your actual level and see other people's actual level gives you an idea of what skill level they might be. And Darktide is a game, where they want to be nice to people. They don't want people to be trash talking. We don't want this to be a Call of Duty lobby, Modern Warfare 2 style, people getting dunked on in the comments in the chat. So we don't have a scoreboard either. We have other things that you think might make the game more playable. In a game that's centered around building builds, why can't I, see my builds? Why can't I see the damage that I'm doing in game? Why can't I tell how I'm doing? Why can't I see how many times I've been down, how much damage I'm doing to, certain enemy types in the game? Why can't I see this information? Because you'd think in a game that entire late game is centered around making builds that we would actually get to have some content like that. So that brings us to the scoreboard. There's no scoreboard. You can't see those things. Mods. You come over here to Hadron, in fact. You see, we'll have this list of mods. They say you want to re-bless an item. You can't even see without a mod which blessings you're missing here. They're just question marks. You have no idea what you're missing. You just kind of have to deal with it. See, I've had 500 hours in this game, and I can't tell. I don't have, and I wouldn't be able to tell which of these I'm missing. Inspiring Barrage. I don't even know what this one is. I don't have it on any of my weapons. I would have no idea that Inspiring Barrage even exists until I just looked at it. 4% toughness for every 10% of your magazine spent during continuous fire. Nobody knows that that a lot of these even exist because they're clearly not as rare as each other. There's clearly different rarities on these that people just don't get. This is the kind of thing that tires people out in Darktide and really leads to major problems. And here's something else we have. We have our weapon customization that I've added in because why? The Hellbore Lasgun. It's a build that I made today. You can check it out. Plug that. Shameless. I know. But the Hellbore Lasgun itself, it doesn't usually look like this. And it will open up the appearance. What is this page? You've never seen this in Darktide. Well, this is another mod. The weapon customization mod. Oh, you want to change out the barrel? Boom. We can make your weapon look entirely different. We put different emblems on it. We do all kinds of stuff. It's absolute ridiculous amount of customization from this community mod. And I don't think people are asking for mods like this, but when you have the quintessential sniper of the video game, the Hellbore Lasgun, it's supposed to be the veteran's sniper rifle, essentially, is the idea, right? It doesn't even have a sight on it. What do you mean it doesn't have a sight on it? And you try and use it in the game, the iron sight on it is horrible. It's like it was barely even developed. It was barely even made. So even having the ability to take like a sight from another gun, maybe just replace the flashlight on my gun for a sight or something, right? Just things like that make the game so much nicer to play, so much more replayable, so much more customizable. Things like that people in the community really appreciate and are clearly not that hard to implement because of the modding community doing it themselves. So that really brings people to ask, what are the devs doing? What's the update schedule of the game? What's going on there? Are these things going to be added? Are they going to be fixed? We only hear from the people like every other month, if we're lucky, on what content's upcoming in the game and what's changing. And we know that there's unadded content in the game. For instance, on the bolter I was just talking about, there are other blessings that we know are in the files of the game that just haven't even been added. They've been developed, but they haven't been added. Where is this stuff at? Gameplay. Gameplay in Darktide is the core mechanic of the game, and to be honest, there's two main parts of any good game. There is the gameplay itself, and there is the late game itself. There's two parts of the game. There is the intro, the tutorial, leveling up, doing the campaign, whatnot, and then there is the late game. Well, let's start off with the gameplay. The gameplay is fantastic. The gameplay loop of combat and the map design is fantastic. The campaign kind of doesn't exist. We're like a year and a half into the game's existence, and they're still just finally fleshing out the inklings of a kind of gameplay campaign. So let's say it doesn't get any points for the campaign, but the core combat and gameplay of the actual maps and combat of the game is fantastic. The bedrock foundation of this game is absolutely fantastic, and that's what a lot of people's frustrations come from in this game, is that they can see the potential that this game has, and it's kind of being overlooked. Now that is kind of the theme of the gaming industry as a whole in 2023, 2024, is that the Activision Blizzards, the EAs of this world, they're just milking these games for, loot boxes and microtransactions and whatever. The game comes out, if it's not a sheer instant success, abandon the game. And this happens with all kinds of games. Darktide, we don't know if that's exactly the case, but this is common in the gaming industry, is that these unfinished games come out, rushed in development with understaffed teams. The games get pushed out, they're unfinished, there's huge hype behind the game comes out, it's a flop, your Steam charts plummet, your player base plummets, and you can never really build back to what you once were. There's not every game is a Star Wars Battlefront 2, where the game finally comes back 3 or 4 years later. Of course, then EA promptly abandoned that game. So just like that, games go up and down. let's take a look at this game from the perspective of a casual player. A casual player has time to play maybe 2 or 3 missions a night. They want to build a nice new build. They finally gotten to level 30 after playing for a few weeks on one character, okay? They finally gotten to level 30 on one character, and they want to build a new build. Well, let's take this build that I made today, for example. This is on the upper end of RNG. However, the crafting system is RNG based, so we're going to go with my most recent build that I made. This Hellbore Lasgun build took me 600,000 Ordo Dockets to get the Hellbore Lasgun that I really wanted to, considering all these blessing problems, and I kept getting stamina on the perks and whatnot. Just useless perks, useless blessings that you didn't want, and of course they lock you out. You can't re-roll them. It took me 600,000 Ordo Dockets to get, and I did the math here. You say you get an average of 40,000 Ordo Dockets a game, 600,000 Ordo Dockets for the build, and we're not using any kind of quick play or curio bonuses to get Ordo Dockets faster. That averages out to about 15 games. For an average person, the casual afternoon player that has a job and maybe a family and kids or whatever, has time to play 2 or 3 games a day, that could take, 3 to 5 days just to save up enough money to try and build a new build. And what are you doing in that meantime? Using your old builds that you're already bored with? You're playing the same missions you're already bored with? You're getting bored of the game, all right? And that brings us to the second part. Late game for hardcore players. People that have 500 plus hours in the game, they've maxed out all their characters. They have like a mid-max build on every single character in the game like I do, except for the Ogre, and I haven't played the Ogre very much. But they have these mid-max builds for all the characters in the game. What do? They're playing the exact same missions over and over again. There's no scoreboard, there's no leaderboard, there's nothing really to actually grind for in the game. I mean, if you look at the actual missions available in the game, first of all, they're all RNG, so, if you really want to play on a certain map, good luck. That's probably not going to happen. I remember when one of the new maps came out in this game, I got on for 3 or 4 days in a row and played for 2 or 3 hours each of those days, and I didn't get to play the new map any of those days. What kind of experience is that you just released this new map on your Tuesday update, and this, people have gotten on to play it, and they don't even get to play it because it doesn't show up in the random mission board, right? That's just one of the many problems that are example of things that plague Darktide, is that people get frustrated with the game. They have a 10 out of 10 first part of the game, but when it comes to the late game, it's like a 0 out of 10 because there's just no progression to shoot for. There's nothing left in the game to really aim for people that are devoted to the game. You're punishing your new players, your less hardcore players, and you're punishing your hardcore players. You're leaving a homeless. Everybody's homeless. Everybody's homeless. Nobody knows what to do with the game. The hardcore players have beat the hardest missions and are wanting more, and there's nothing more to do. And the not hardcore players, the casual players, are saying, this game's really difficult for me, and I don't have people to group up with, and I can't make the builds that I want to build because it takes forever. I'm just going to start playing the game and go play a different game because it's easy to do. There's tons of other games out there. People leave and go do other things after they get bored of the mechanics of the game, and they can't progress because it takes so dang long. So, finally, that brings us to content. Content is an issue when it comes to Darktide, and they've never been able to keep a consistent schedule. Originally they were supposed to have, a new map every month, new events every month. The game was sold to us as a live service game. A few months in, we find that, their communication's dwindling, the maps aren't coming out. It took us like 4 or 5 months to even get one new map into Darktide since launch. Since launch, there's been, I think, maybe 3 maps added. Regardless, the content drip is slow. Where is the content now? We had this year 1 update. It was fantastic. But again, where are they now? It's been about a month or 2 since we've heard from the devs. We've had a few hot patches, when everybody's expecting, what's next for Darktide. We had this great year 1 patch that reworked the entire game, the talent trees, we got great new maps, and we got a new special event. And now it's just kind of quiet. Where is this? And if you look back at the Steam charts from the beginning of the video, you see that the player drop-off was slower because the content was enjoyable, but we run into this exact same problem that Darktide has, and that there's no endgame. There's an endgame that there's some people out there that are willing to do that grind, that have fun with the grind, and have fun with the gameplay loop enough to actually commit to the game and grind it out and make all these different classes, like myself. However, a majority of the casual community is like, I don't have even kind of the time for this, and there's like 2 or 3 other games I really want to play, so they just leave. So that leaves Darktide where it's at, where it has this community base of people that enjoy playing the games, and they hop back on for the updates. As we saw that really big update for year one, the player numbers spiked up huge, but then, the player base dwindles off because there's just nothing enticing the players to come back, leaving us, wanting more, wanting something more from a game that clearly has the potential to do it. So where is Darktide going from now? The content needs to step it up. We have seen from Fat Shark, from the devs, that they have good content that they can put out. However, where is it? Is it going to come? Is it not? Is the game dead? Like, the community needs to know from Fat Shark if the new content, are we going to get one big update a year? Is that what the situation is? Because we had to wait one whole year for the game to honestly be in the state it should have been at launch. Okay, I can confidently say that the year one patch update that added in the talent trees is the state that Darktide probably should have launched in a year prior, which is why the game is in a dilapidated state from what it should be. It should have been much more enjoyable at launch, and they should be adding in more late game content just now. Only would be 6 months after the launch of the game instead of a year and a half. Games used to only be popular for a few years. Now we're getting into this world where people think games are just going to stick around forever. Oh, my live service game is going to go on for 5 or 10 years. People are going to play the game. Yeah, well, if you don't make a finished game in the first place, people aren't going to play your game for the 10 years to come because they're not going to play your game in the first place, right? We have to, if you're going to make a live service game, you need to staff up your studios. You need to have a plan, an action plan. You need to communicate with your base. I think Darktide's community is actually rather understanding, ironically, as some might think that the base is not. But ironically, I think the base is actually quite understanding and would be willing to take on, they said that the update's going to come in 1 month or 2 months instead this time, and it's going to be a nice update. We're going to get this thing. We're going to work towards this. Instead, we get basically nothing. The year one update again, fantastic. But what's next? What's next? Is anything else coming? I mean, the player base has dropped off back to its almost dead game state of 3,000 average daily players, which for a live service game where your only monetization strategy is skins that aren't priced badly, but they're not priced. Anyways, the skins are your only source of income. How are you going to maintain that model, right? Microsoft Live Pass or whatever it is, online players getting money from Microsoft for just being on the Game Pass. Like, how is this game going to sustain itself? So overall, I think that's just the total idea for Darktide, is that the content was promised. It's not delivered. We've seen good content added from Darktide, but not nearly at the pace that's required to maintain a live service game. And to be honest, this game has the absolute potential to be a fantastic live service game if they double down, triple down on like the story and the lore of Darktide. Warhammer fans are suckers for lore. Okay, I'm not the most into the Warhammer universe, but this is a great game, and they're just not producing what they could be producing for this game. I don't know why. I don't know who's being stingy with the funds. I don't know what's going on at the studio, but come on. Make the content. The people will come. Clearly, there's the demand for the content, and people just fail to supply to that demand for reasons I do not understand. Something that always amazes me in these games is what was one of the most replayable games of the 2000s, right? Call of Duty Zombies. People would play Call of Duty Zombies for hours. I played Call of Duty Zombies for hours. It amazes me that games come out, multiplayer games, and especially, Doom Eternal was in this situation from my perspective as well, that, these multiplayer games come out. They are these horde-based shooter games of waves of enemies, blah, 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 and they don't have an endless mode. Endless modes just add something for the community to work towards. People in late game to work towards. Okay, I'm getting really good at the game. I've gotten really good at the game. What's a way I can push myself? Well, a horde mode would be fantastic. What if we had a horde mode in Darktide, wave-based or something? You can modify your map and your defenses a little bit or something, trying to hold out for, Hadron or whatever to come save your ass from whatever mission, and, whatever, something like that, And the game gets harder the longer you go. Your ordo dockets you earn exponentially increases. The diamantine you earn exponentially increases. I mean, there's so many ways you could fix this game and add more really fun, really replayable content that has had essentially no emphasis put on it. Like, all these zombie, like Doom Eternal had the exact same problem. However, it wasn't a multiplayer game; it was a single-player focused game. And to be honest, they delivered a great story campaign and great gameplay. So I'm not going to hate on Doom Eternal too much. It was a fantastic game. They actually delivered on their promises, unlike Darktide is currently doing. So that is all I think I have for today on the content for Darktide. This is the state of Darktide is basically in its second limbo. The first year was limbo number 1. Now year 2 is looking to be limbo number 2, and honestly, if year 2 doesn't pick up, I think that's just about it for Darktide, to be honest. I don't think it can sustain. It just doesn't have the content to continue on. A new map is nice, but it won't sustain forever. So thank you guys for watching. Hopefully we hear from the Darktide devs in a week or 2, and if we don't, then I don't even know where they're at. Maybe in Maui or something, on vacation in Hawaii. Who knows? Thanks for the watch. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff. I'll see you guys in the next one. Pop by the live streams. Turn on the notifications. If you're still here, that's crazy. Goodbye.